Hello and welcome to the Master's Voice podcast series here on Mediabrief.com. My name is Pavan R Chawla. With me today is a wonderful industry veteran who very generously consented to being on this series, on this podcast, give me time on the sidelines of FICCI Frames 2019 in Mumbai, Jim Egan. Jim has been leading BBC Global News Ltd for close to 7 years as CEO and is responsible for leading the BBC's commercially funded news business with P&L responsibility for £100 million turnover and a weekly audience of 95 million people globally. BBC Global News Ltd operates the BBC World News Channel and bbc.com/news, the BBC's international news website. Before becoming CEO, Jim was Director Strategy and Distribution for 5 years at BBC Global News, setting and implementing strategy for the BBC's international news, current affairs and sports content in 28 languages and for its distribution to audiences of more than 250 million people worldwide. Jim is one of the most reputed industry veterans globally with more than 20 years of illustrious experience, which includes 4 years as Ofcom's first strategy director. He was also part of the launch team. Jim led on broadcasting policy development and the UK's digital switchover process. He also served as specialist advisor to Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. Jim has also been with BSkyB for 2 years and with PwC as principal consultant for 7 years before that. So here's Jim Egan with me. I'm Pavan R Chawla on Mediabrief.com and let's go straight into the conversation with Jim Egan, CEO, BBC Global News Ltd. Jim, you are CEO of BBC Global News.
Mm-hmm.
What are your primary mandates there?
Making the numbers add up. So it's a fascinating sector to work in. It's a hackneyed term, but it's a genuine privilege to represent the BBC, particularly internationally, which is an organisation which is widely known and also generates a certain amount of respect in certain parts of the world. We're not loved everywhere. I should stress that, and there are many markets where actually we have quite a difficult time, but nevertheless running the commercial news subsidiary, my main job is to try to ensure that we do so on a way which at least breaks even and hopefully generates a little bit of a surplus in a really fast-moving media landscape, not just here in India, but right around the world. But it's something which is which pays for itself just about commercially, but of course is also something that we think at the BBC is very important, and to be working in and around news at such an unprecedented time of turbulence but also interest in national and international events has enduring appeal for me.
What are the most cherished, sacrosanct, if you will, values and principles of the BBC as a news organisation?
So I suppose, how would I answer that? We talk about impartiality, independence, accuracy, balance, those sorts of things, which you might regard as being very predictable, really. And they're certainly old values. They're things that the BBC started writing down in the 1920s and 30s. But I think we're not embarrassed about that we regard those as, enduring values of journalism. They're certainly not unique to the BBC. Lots of other organisations pursue those values. But I think what's important about them, as people fret about fake news and disinformation and so on, is that we stay true to those values. We don't lose sight of them. And I don't think it's right to regard them as old-fashioned or legacy or outdated. Actually, they're even more important, perhaps, in 2019 than they've ever been.
Yes, they are timeless, aren't they? So some of the major concern areas in the space of news and the society that it serves are, to my mind, fake news, hate speech, election interference, and harassment. In fact, Facebook has been receiving enormous flack and censure for these on its various platforms. So at the BBC, what do you see as the biggest concern areas, and how do you work to ensure that your news teams don't end up abetting them innocently?
Right, so I think The primary focus for the BBC is for us to continue doing what we've always been doing, as I hinted in my previous answer. So although we are concerned about fake news, I think our focus is more on ensuring the BBC continues to do real news, and that whether that content appears on the BBC's own outlets or on Facebook or Google or Twitter, that we are sticking to those values of journalism, and that we are being a source of news information that people can trust. I think we are also as open as we can be in recognising that the BBC, like every other news organisation, isn't right 100% of the time. And we do make mistakes. I think that's inevitable for any journalistic organisation that is doing serious work, and it's important for us to own up to those mistakes and to concede that they have been made when they occur. But we are concerned about fake news, as any serious news organisation, as any citizen should be, because it's a global phenomenon that's really, it's a term that's entered just everyday language, having really not been recognised until three or four years ago. It's something that we see playing out in every market around the world, and particularly at election time. It is a serious issue, and we've got big investigations underway, including criminal investigations in the UK, about what happened during the referendum in 2016, where the decision was taken for the UK to leave the EU. Big concerns about funding, ownership, sources of information, and also the way in which that information was targeted. So it's a global phenomenon, something that we're seeing. And here in India, we are, as the election campaign gathers speed, we are trying to do a small number of practical things to make a positive difference to that.
I'm sure it's completely innate to everybody at the BBC to be careful about the news that they cover and to make sure that it's completely vetted properly. Do you also have a process, like a reporter files copy, for instance, and the desk looks at it for, everything, the headline, the journalistic news desk thing. Do you also have something now which is akin to a news desk, but which actually vets the news for accuracy, just to make sure that nobody gets into the pitfall of fake news? Is that a process?
Much of that process is a process that's existed for decades, right? It hasn't really changed very, very much, and that's something that our trainee journalists who join the BBC are schooled in. They go through a program. We have a 300-page set of editorial guidelines which are published on the web. We also have an area of our website which talks about why you can trust the BBC. Now, people have different views on whether or not they may be able to trust the BBC, and we're under a huge amount of pressure in the UK, particularly because we're going through such a hotly contested political period right now. So there are lots of pockets, whether it's in the UK or elsewhere around the world, who don't necessarily buy the argument that the BBC is trustworthy and lives up to the highest values. But it's something which the organisation has kind of professional practice in. There is a culture at the BBC which actually, to a large degree, goes unspoken. So I was fascinated when I joined the BBC 12 years ago that nobody ever talks about their own political views and preferences. And it's not as a consequence of someone saying to you on day one, never speak about these things. It just becomes very evident as soon as you've been in the building for an hour or two that certain things are simply not done. And so I think it's a combination of that practice, but also that culture that hopefully means that we can sustain journalism which is largely accurate, wholly impartial, balanced, and so on, despite the turbulence of everything that's happening right now.
How do you see the news space in India, Jim? A, in terms of the quality editorially, on ethics, etc., and two, on the business front.
So I'm very careful not to give sort of ignorant or sort of partially informed views on the media sector anywhere where we work. I will say that it's turning on the TV news in India and scrolling through the channels can be quite an exhausting experience. They are busy channels, often quite voluble ones, and that's clearly what audiences like, and that's the practice, and it's become the established norms. And I sometimes look at our channel, scrolling up and down through the EPG, and I think, oh my goodness, it's a bit empty here. It's a bit barren, and things moving a bit slowly. But that's the way we've chosen to run our channel, and it's different to many of the Indian channels here, and perhaps not to everybody's taste, but that's the particular view that we have. But it's a market that's vibrant in every sense, not just editorially, but also financially, and it's growing at a rate that you don't see in many other places around the world, certainly not in big markets, to be seeing advertising rates of 13, 14, 15% going up year on year. So it's one that's also full of opportunity and potential, and we're very happy to play a small but hopefully meaningful part here in the Indian landscape and to see our position growing.
And now with the elections round the corner, it's going to get far more voluble, right?
It's inevitable, I suppose, that the election is taking place. It's a huge democratic exercise, unlike anything we see anywhere else in the world. So that sort of electoral event is something that we try to portray and describe to our audiences outside India who don't understand India as well. There's a huge amount at stake, both economically and also in terms of national and regional security, of course. So, the focus of the world's attention will be on India over the next couple of months, and we'll be doing our best to tell that story.
Today, most news channels in India are in the red. What would you say a not-so-successful news channel, which may be editorially pretty good, needs to do to get out of the red? In India, that is.
Well, it's... That's an issue I have a huge amount of sympathy with, because BBC World News and BBC.com, as your readers and followers may know, is solely commercially funded, so we don't receive any public funding ourselves. And if you want to run a high quality editorial outlet, particularly a news channel, it's an expensive game. Right. You have a lot of fixed cost in the business, not very much of it is variable. And you have huge and increasing uncertainty about revenue sources, even in a market like India, which is growing so quickly. But not all of the growth is going towards news. Not all of the growth is going towards TV channels within news and so on. So we found in recent years diversifying revenue, building out an online presence where there has been more growth has been successful for us. But it's also important for us that in India we are paid for our carriage. We do not pay for carriage. That's not something that's sort of the result of strategic brilliance and insight. We simply couldn't afford to buy carriage here in India, so our position has always been that we're only going to be carried if we are paid for. And we're delighted that we're able to sustain that.
It's also the quality and the brilliance of your entire channels and their propositions.
Oh, you're very kind. Thanks for saying so.
No. How has the new tariff order impacted the BBC in India, do you think, or it's too early to say?
Well, you've stolen my answer there. I think we were very concerned about how that might play out, because the BBC is basically a standalone channel here, and we're an international channel in the English language. We are somewhat marginal on the landscape. So things are still settling down, but so far we are a bit more optimistic about how it may play out, actually, certainly compared to originally we were deeply concerned about what it may mean for us. But so far things seem to be going not too badly.
Yeah. And what do you see the new tariff order doing to the television industry in India?
Impossible to answer at this stage. I think we're only at the dawn of that. But speaking with some of the operators here in India, people are certainly quite concerned about what the consequences may be. I think we really don't know enough yet about what the subscriber reaction is going to be, because we're just at the stage of people moving from their old packs and bouquets to really being in this a la carte world. But it's a seismic change, I think, both for platform operators and also for broadcasters and subscribers themselves. We've seen some similar things elsewhere, but it's quite rare for such a dramatic change to be happening. But as far as I can tell, players seem to be complying with the new order. Subscribers are starting to get their heads around it, and we're going to be watching it very closely.
Well, thank you so much, Jim, for that insightful conversation, that chat. Thank you very much for being on Mediabrief.com.
Thanks very much for your time today, Pavan. It's been a pleasure to meet you here in Mumbai. Thanks for your interest in the BBC.